Hello and welcome to pubnfig. In this video, I'm going to watch and react to The Eternals. Now, to be clear, I have seen this movie already, but that was only while it was in theaters. That was way over 2 years ago now. But yeah, that was the last time I watched that, with the full intention that whenever I go to rewatch it, I would be recording myself, because I had a lot of hope going into this movie. And I know some people like the movie. I'm not here to bash on that. I might even try to widen my appeal or taste going into the second viewing, but I had a lot of expectations, or at least I had some expectations based on my research on who the characters were in the comics that were just not met at all and make even less sense in my opinion. So I might sprinkle a lot of that throughout the video. I don't want to do it all in the beginning just to bore, so I'll do that throughout. As of now, I don't have a Patreon or anything, but if you want it to be a thing, comment down below or show your support in some other way. Now, I did mention I have a lot of negative points, but there are some positive points I do remember, and there may be some things I may actually be a little bit more lenient or actually have some good thoughts for. So with that, I'm going to bring over our handy dandy whiteboard. So we're going to use the DeepDive blue for our good points, and we are going to use just red for all the bad points, and expect there to be a lot of red on here. Now, one thing you may have noticed clicking on this video is that this video is called DeepDive Live. Now, those of you who know this channel know that there is just DeepDive. DeepDive Live is basically where everything is unscripted. This would be where if I were to do reaction stuff or just this kind of stuff where I want my feelings to be genuine versus being scripted and thought of beforehand, where I kind of want it to be on the spot. So, may make a video on this in the future, but this one is entirely raw. And I may make future videos like this in the future. I may do one for No Way Home, although that one would be negative. That would just be going over all the positive points, and I will be doing a lot of pausing throughout, so yay. Oh, yeah. Ignore this. I got myself some new mics, and they're both the same, but I didn't realize this wasn't going to be long enough, so I will have to buy some kind of extension later. So, go ahead and get your popcorn and stuff ready. And I have my drink ready with me. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Oh, this is still way too hot. Alright, yeah, so we just had a good chunk of black screen, but then we finally get these credits. Now, when I first saw this, I was like, oh, okay, it's a take on the creation kind of mythology. Whether you see it as fake or not, that's not the point of the word mythology. You can watch my Power of Myth series from way back when. The thing I actually liked about this, with them kind of going back to this and going over things before a good chunk of other stuff, is it seems kind of random, but it actually fits in with prior MCU stuff, specifically the Dark Elves from Thor: The Dark World.
Long before the birth of light, there was darkness, and from that darkness came the Dark Elves.
So I actually kind of liked that they expanded on the MCU creation mythology a little bit. So in the beginning, before the six singularities, the Infinity Stones, and the dawn of creation, came the Celestials. Arishem, the prime celestial, created the first sun and brought light into the universe. So the Dark Elves may have existed in this in-between, possibly. Life began and thrived, all was in balance. No idea. Let's just pretend it's somewhere in that first paragraph. Until an unnatural species of predator emerged from deep space to feed the intelligent life, they were known as deviants. That's interesting. So we're actually looking at the propagandized mythology from the Celestials. If you haven't seen this before, I won't actually say much yet, but I know a little bit of what happens later, so I know that this isn't truly what happens based on what's later established. I will say this, and I will give them props throughout the video. This was before the kind of CGI slump of Phase 4, so the VFX in this movie are great. I don't want to dock on that. Maybe I'll dock on some designs later, but for the most part, or at least what I can even remember, it's all really good.
Got shot.
Oh. It's kind of weird how chilly it was. Okay, here's something I will give props to. Icarus is a really good Superman. The way I don't think Superman should necessarily feel this effortless. But for someone who's supposed to be a Superman adjacent-ish character, however you want to categorize him, he does do that really well. Okay, I do have some complaints with the sign language stuff, because some people have pointed out how it's anachronistic, as in some things don't match the timeline. Something I do like, one thing I noticed when kind of thinking about the Eternals after my initial viewing, is the kind of division that they'll have. There's 10 Eternals in total, and what's interesting is that 5 of them are like kind of combat focused. So I kind of like how we're actually introduced in this action scene to all 5. We've got Icarus, who's the one flying with the Superman laser eyes, and then we got Makari with the super speed, Athena here with the shield and the sword thing, Gilgamesh with the super strength, and then Kingo with the like the laser fingers, laser blast, kind of the projectile man. So we got Kingo, projectile, Gilgamesh, brute strength, Athena, I guess weapon mastery and just weapon creation, which is good, and then Superman stuff, and I'm assuming a good chunk of strength as well. Maybe not Gilgamesh strength. And then Makari just with super speed. I don't remember if that's more of a kind of a dash super speed where it's just fast to be fast, or if it's like a Quicksilver flash, it slows down time. I don't remember. But I do like how they introduce, like in this combat setting, kind of the combat Eternals. Yeah, just the effortless flying is just really cool in my opinion. Yeah, so we got the 5 combat ones that were during the fight, and now that the fight's over, we have the other 5 coming into the scene.
Thank you, Ajak.
Okay, that was a little bit of a... that was a delivery. And this kind of shot, kind of cool. They used it in the marketing just to show the whole team. It's kind of hard to do it in a wide shot, but it's whatever. Now we've got Sersi, and she's... I think it's just full on, can just change matter. I don't know if she can like with that, if there was kind of the engravings already on that, with like kind of like the golden bump right below the blade, or if she changed that, but it's definitely some kind of matter changing power. Yeah, like all the circular bumps there kind of look like a bowling pin. Oh, that's okay. That's actually kind of cool with all the celestial comic book art. One thing I will go into, I guess I can say now that this is gone, is the Celestials and the Eternals was I don't know if it's like a passion project is the proper term, but it was kind of a dream idea that Jack Kirby had. So there may be a lot of Jack Kirby art inspiration, similar to what we saw in Thor Ragnarok, because Thor Ragnarok was flooded with Jack Kirby kind of aesthetics. But like these are his creations specifically. And people like to say that this was his kind of like attempt A, may not have done super well, but then when he jumped ship to DC and he created the New Gods, that was a lot more polished. So you can definitely make comparisons in between the two. Actually, hold on, let me pause it here real quick. Let me go ahead and start working on the pros and cons. So the VFX we know is pretty good, and we will see that throughout, especially with how they use their powers. How the visual effects look great, and it's kind of unfortunate that was one of the last things before the Phase 4 CGI slump. So I mean, kind of fortunate because that's one of the few things like off the top of my head that it has going for it. I mean, like I mentioned a few other things, but when it comes like the main takeaways, so far I think this is it. And I don't have any, we just have that one line from Icarus that was a little bit shaky, but I'm not going to dock it for that.
Break everyone, get down, under the tables.
I'm confused by that kid because, one, I mean, sure, it was something over your head, but it was something that could fall, which clearly did. And second, Sersi just broke a probably priceless thing. I mean, it had to be fair. I would have broken it if it actually touched the ground, probably. Oh, deviant boy. Got the doggo. Oh, now I'm kind of upset that I didn't eat the two.
What?
No, all right. I know that sounds bad.
I guess that's to show us that the deviant isn't the true villain all along. I mean, I think it is, but... I will say, this plotline is actually one of the better parts of this movie. I won't say anything yet because don't want to spoil anything for those who haven't seen this yet. But I will say this is probably one of the better parts of the movie, is Sprite. And I will admit, like, there were changes made from the comics to this, and Sprite, I think, is one of the most consistent parts, like, from adaptation to screen, or original adaptation.
This is from the Middle Ages.
There's your family crest.
It must have cost a fortune.
I'm a good eBay bidder.
Thank you.
I got, just for saying eBay made me think of Transformers.
How'd you know about his glasses?
eBay.
Have you given any more thought to us moving in together?
Yeah, I've thought about it. I can't.
Thought you'd say that.
I'm sorry.
Are you a wizard? And Sprite says things.
I don't understand. I mean, maybe they'll go down further, but I don't really get why they keep their names. I've read a few Eternals comics. I don't remember I mean, I do remember that there was one run. Yeah, I think they were all given amnesia, and I think they had to point out that Sersi is actually the most active from the Eternals to do other things. Like everyone else that has just been kind of sidelined in the comics, but Cersei's actually pretty prominent in the comics in a few instances. What those instances are, I can't remember, but I think she has something to do with the comic sword, which is now the movie Saber. I don't necessarily like that. They're keeping their regular names. I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, like, Cersei is a regular enough name, but, like, what does she have as her last name? Why is Sprite still called Sprite? Because, maybe I'll explain this a bit now. So, when Jack Kirby was creating these characters, they were set in their own universe. So, like, they were published by Marvel, but they weren't a part of the main Marvel mythos. I think they even had a Marvel comic in that debut comic issue. The Celestials were in that, Eternals established in that, and they didn't have the amnesia plotline then. I know I just didn't read much after that first issue. I read more for like a recent run that I heard that they were adapting for this, and that's where I learned a little bit more. But the idea behind what Jack Kirby was creating these is that these Eternals inspired the mythologies around the world. So like you have Sersi, she's kind of seen as a magical person. And in Greek mythology, you have Sersi, who I think she's some kind of witch. I think she's like a sea witch or something, or has her own island. I don't fully remember, but I think it's Greek mythology, where there's a character named Sersi that's like that. And you have that with a few other cases, like Makari, who's the speedster Eternal. Their name sounds like Mercury, which is supposed to be the Roman messenger god. The Greek name is Hermes, but basically, it's the winged foot one, who's really fast. So it's like, speedy Eternal, let's interpret that as this fast messenger god. And then you have, Gilgamesh is stripped Gilgamesh, just the strong guy from, was it Mesopotamia? Somewhere in that region. And like the oldest manuscript or written story I think we have, something along those lines. But the idea was like they inspired all these mythologies around the world. I don't remember what all the more, I don't remember what Ajak was supposed to be, unless, I think there's a character named Ajax, but I don't remember what mythology or whatever they're associated with. Druig, no idea. But Sprite is supposed to have inspired the idea of these sprites, or fairies, which if you want to see why we think of a soda, going over the Coca-Cola kind of thing and taking how Coca-Cola, blew up with Santa Claus, and then they gave him this weird little elf-ish helper named Sprite, who's this weird little guy. And then he was with him for a while, and then they're like, what if we just make a new soda? Or maybe they were making this new soda and wanted to name for it, and they're like, let's just name it after this guy and redeem this character that everybody doesn't really have a big fond thing over. So that's why we have the Sprite drink named Sprite. So going back, it's always been rooted in like fairies or just these small magical things, which we see with this character Sprite, like holograms and illusions or whatever. Yeah, so all this to say, I don't get why they're using their real names or how they're able to have that work in the modern day.
Past my bedtime. I did it!
I can't remember, is it trying to... Oh yeah, it is trying to hunt them specifically. I'll get this going, but I'm actually going to add Sprite as a positive to the whiteboard, just because I felt like they adapted Sprite really well. And you'll see what I mean by that. I'm just putting it ahead of time. Oh yeah, and Icarus. It's basically the story of Icarus. Now, the spellings are what's different, the pronunciation's the same. Okay, this VFX shot, it was in the trailers, but still. I kind of fear what on earth happened to the people inside, especially the bus driver, but the visuals are cool. Oh, never mind, he is alive. Okay, good. I can sleep easy now. Although, that kind of confirmed that he was the only guy on the bus then.
Did it just heal itself?
It's actually really good. And
What did he say? You have to, don't do it.
That's actually really cool. I don't know why I didn't think about that. That's really cool. For like creating illusions is invisibility.
Why didn't you guys help fight Thanos? Or any war, or all the other terrible things throughout history?
The question people had going into
We
the
were
movie.
instructed not to interfere in any human conflicts unless deviants are involved.
Why?
If we
With her, Thanos doesn't count as a means to help because it's not a deviant issue. I hope I remember. I'll just use the red one for now. So, our first, I've had like little nitpicks here and there. Those are fine. But I'm going to put this one here. Just going to label it as Thanos for why not help to help. I know where I can explain a lot of where my frustration is because it's all kind of encapsulated within one large sequence. Or at least where things deviate from the comics. And that's where a lot of my frustration comes from.
Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun.
Sprite made that story up when we lived in Athens.
That kind of goes into the inspired mythologies and stuff. So Sprite was telling these stories of Icarus who flew too close to the sun. Was it like this is one of the minor things they tackled throughout the movie? It's kind of what I really liked about this is what do you do with these kind of godlike characters that live forever? So like that kind of like what do you do with love or relationships or things like that? So I kind of like that they're asking those or answering those questions. Okay, then we get one of our mini flashback segments, which, again, you can see here, visuals look great. Choreography, you know, is entertaining. I don't know from Makari whether it's slow down or just fast, period. I would say the one thing, like with the fact that they do all these flashbacks, you know, and they kind of have to, or at least to kind of flesh out this elongated timescale feel. This would have been something that I feel like could have warranted a Disney Plus show because, kind of spoilers, they don't really flesh out the group very well. Like, they focus on Sersi a good bit, which is fine, you need your focal character. But, like, for the whole ensemble, you don't really feel much cohesion or characterization amongst all of them. Yeah, you've got your 5 combatant Eternals right there. But they don't really do much to flesh out the characters, though. So I feel like if they did a series, whether they do, or like I remember I pitched the idea, you do 2 movies, you do one where it takes place all in the past, and then you do this modern day one where the Deviants have come back, we establish the stakes and these characters and blah, 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 blah. Or you do a show where you're able to spend so much more time to establish, I need to pause it. The thing with shows is they take significantly longer than movies. So if you're going to have this thing that's supposed to take place over this space of time, use more time for what the show medium. It just doesn't seem to make much sense for whatever reason that this was a movie and some other things like Falcon the Winter Soldier was a show. Especially since, I haven't watched that in a while. But I remember one thing they said, which is kind of something that has kind of made it feel when it comes to this show movie landscape that Marvel has. Like going into it, they said it's basically just going to be a 4-hour, however long the total runtime was, movie. Like they just took a movie and they made it longer to fit the show medium. And it's like, do you really need to waste that much of an audience's time? Sure, you can put a good chunk of good stuff in there, but it's like, does it need to take that long, especially for people who like need to binge stuff in order to catch up for all the Marvel content? Like WandaVision, I think is fine. I mean, especially since like the first half or almost half are like 20-minute episodes, so those are easier to binge. But the fact that it looks as sitcoms makes it fit the episodic medium a lot better. I mean, Eternals is just something that I feel like would use the runtime. But like, I feel like you need to do smaller things, like a Daredevil or something that's like not necessarily going to affect the status quo as much, and put them into shows. Loki is a kind of exception just because of how good they do it. That's really the only reason it's an exception. Like Moon Knight was really good, but we haven't seen Moon Knight since then. If we don't really see much of Moon Knight next, especially if he doesn't change the status quo that much, then he's fine to be a show. Like Hawkeye, I would say, is a great example. Because, like, sure, you officially introduce Kingpin into the MCU. Spoiler, sorry. You establish the Kate Bishop Hawkeye. And if you need to use any of those characters in the future, you could easily describe who those are. Versus, like, if Falcon the Winter Soldier, where it's like, you need to watch an entire show to figure out what's going on. And with the Eternals, they don't really plug into anything else, so they're kind of fine on that front to fit the runtime better, to better establish these characters, because they don't really do that. So far, we've got, and I've had little nitpicks or praises here and there, but for the bigger categories, Thanos, that's just more of a reminder for me to talk about that whole arena later, and there's a few reasons for that. Like characterization, kind of bringing that up early, that's where I feel like a longer runtime actually kind of helped this. The visual effects, great. Sprite. I like how a lot of the things I've talked about are actually around Sprite. It's kind of funny, but I'll talk maybe a little bit more about that towards the end or throughout. Let's get into this scene with Ajak and Arishem.
Arishem.
Yep.
It's an engine. It moves steam from high pressure to low pressure.
I do kind of like this visionary aspect to Phastos. I mean, I don't know if the engine makes a lot of sense, other than it's a higher tech object.
The plow, because that's what it does. Plows dirt.
I feel like it's more of an English joke. I don't know if that lands well in other languages.
Awalki Gilgamesh al-Kama. Gilgamesh unkidu.
Who's the Enkidu in this, though? Like, I know they're basically talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, but who's the Enkidu in the story? I don't even think there is an Enkidu in this story. So yeah, we'll give props to like them referencing, like, you know, smaller stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh, but then also other things like just more of the cultural things, like the fact that this was like a real area, because I think someone has a fragment of this, you know, this blue wall. You see, that's one thing I find a little weird with Makari, is they made her deaf, and I say this because, like, in this sense, it's like I sense vibrations, I can hear when you speak. It's like, then are you just mute versus deaf? Because I know you want to play the kind of deaf angle, but I don't know. And then this is one of the bits that I know where people talk about the anachronicity of the sign language, because I think when they say time here, she like touches her wrist in reference to a watch which hasn't been invented yet. Yeah, like going like this for time. It's like this is like a reference to a watch that hasn't been invented yet. So it's like they could have done like even a made up sign language for the character to be like it's language only the Eternals understand, which I think would be fine. And one thing I do like, we've only seen little bits of here, but I think Druig was one of my favorite characters from this movie. Sprite is definitely a high contender as I'm rewatching this, but
I can feel it. But you are allowed to live a life, you know? Go tell Sersi how you feel.
Like, I think little moments like this work to kind of show how they're, like, specifically with the regular people, just to show how they've tried to integrate and learn and cooperate with them is kind of nice. I mean, it's kind of weird for like a runtime where, you know, you should prioritize maybe more things. We are approaching one of my not so favorite parts of the movie.
Wait, what did I say?
Okay, or something like that is kind of funny. I'm going to add a point for trying to adapt with humanity. Because I think that is something that's kind of nice. Because, like, one thing I really appreciate with this idea, because I really like this idea of what you take godlike, you know, lowercase g, godlike characters who, you know, live for long periods of time or just don't age at all. What does this kind of immortality look like? What kind of strain does it hold? And in this kind of context where it's like you've been around for so long helping, you know, even if you're not trying to help spearhead kind of like the technological evolution, like, you know, how Fastos wanted to show the engine but made a plow instead. I was like, even if they're not really supposed to intervene that much, just them trying to cooperate and learn and be inspired by humans. Like, that kind of element I actually really like. And when I say humans here, I mean like regular humans. I will get into why I specify that, or even why I even am bothering to specify that, because it seems relatively simple. It's like, well, these guys come from space, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I will explain my situation with that. I'm about to explain another gripe I have with this movie. Just me personally. I know a good chunk of people might not care. I do kind of wonder what those suits feel like. Like, do they feel like stone? Do they just feel like a cloth or something? Okay. So, we get a... I'm sure I won't get demonetized for it, but I don't want to bother saying it. We got a scene in between, or a very passionate scene between Icarus and Sersi. I'm not a big fan of this scene. I mean, for one, like, doesn't really follow well with my personal values of like this kind of stuff, you know, before marriage or that kind of thing. Which, you know, granted, this is a far more secular kind of territory, which is fair. I will definitely refer back to the scene later to talk about even more why I don't like it, like within just an in-universe explanation or an in-universe gripe as well. But like the reason why I bring that up is like, you know, I have this value and it's like, sure, you know, maybe the general target audience, you know, might not care. Like with the Tony Stark thing, like in the first Iron Man movie, it's relatively more implied and not, you know, greatly shown. Whereas this is a little bit more shown, you know, for as far as PG-13. But still, it's like for someone who like, you know, watches movies or Marvel stuff with their kids or stuff like that, it's like a scene like this is kind of a, where do I draw the line? Or da-da-da-da-da. Like that just feels like a very kind of adult-ish moment. It's kind of weird with me saying that knowing Deadpool 3 comes out later this year. But it's like Marvel feels like a general, for the most part, feels like an all ages type of stuff. with Deadpool being probably a very weird gray area. But with like a scene like this in Eternals, it's just like it kind of hurts the handing downness of Marvel content. I feel like for like a younger audience, it's like that's like kind of the value part of it, and then I'll refer back to this. So let me just that scene. So I will refer back to that event later. I'm only 30 minutes in. Lovely. Okay, there's actually some color.
Hey, Jack!
Ajak's dead. A character that we got no proper audience character bonding experience has died. We're supposed to feel stakes. I mean, we feel the stakes, but we don't feel the emotional stakes. Hey, at least we learn more about the other characters. Like, we learn how close Sprite and Sersi may have thought about them. And then we see kind of the level-headedness that Icarus has. But as far as our feelings towards Ajak, is like hardly there. I don't get how the speaking bit would be Ajak specifically, but the healing factor, most definitely. Again, visuals are pretty solid. Probably shouldn't say pretty. They are solid. Oh, I never did actually go. I think that was just her perception. Okay, yeah, I will admit, so the transitions they have to the flashbacks are actually more solid than I remember. I do like how this scene, like this was what we just seen, kind of establishes that they aren't impenetrable or invincible or anything. Like, they live long, but they're still mortal. He did that around his hands, so I can't just create gloves and then grab the swords. Oh, that's interesting. That was a trailer shot, but they didn't have the white eyes. Did you hit the chest or did you hit the head? I can't tell. If you hit the head, makes sense. If you hit the chest, now you have to have hit the head.
I thought Mad Weary was a myth.
You have Mad Weary. Your mind is fracturing under the weight of your memories.
I will say, this part, like, there's a big change from the comics to this that I don't like, but this Dina element is what is consistent with this movie adaptation.
Trust me.
Why should she trust you?
Druig, I know you're upset,
Upset? I've watched humans destroy each other when I could stop it all in a heartbeat. Do you know what that does to someone after centuries? Could our mission have been a mistake? Are we really helping these people build a better world, huh?
I'm gonna pause it here because I know a little bit of what happens next. I think Sprite might be one of my favorite Eternals from this movie. But Druig, I remember, was my standout from my first viewing because he really tackled this idea of essentially what does it mean to be a god? You know, lowercase g, thing of like kind of like pagan mythologies, which, you know, kind of based on the lore they inspired. But it's like, what does that do to you to like see humanity throughout this, you know, these lengths of time and to see these constant patterns of war and dominance? You know, in this instance, you know, it's the Spaniards taking over, I think, Central America. I don't think it was South. So like the fact that he's just kind of like, we've seen this and that, we've seen, you know, we're saving humanity, but humanity doesn't, just keeps conquering and causing bloodshed and da 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 da. And like you may have noticed by his color palette, you know, with this, like, it's a very dark suit and like there's hints of red. And I think, if I remember correctly, he's usually the villain Eternal in the comics. Like whenever there's Eternal on Eternal conflict, he's usually the bad guy. Especially since his power is basically mind control. Let me continue with playing and I'll keep going.
We're just like the soldiers down there. Pawns to their leaders. Blinded by loyalty. It ends now.
I just like that because instead of having him be like someone who, I mean, in a way, he's now the new person in charge who's, you know, taking care of these pawns, but he's seeing it more through an act of mercy and almost a pacifist route, which is really interesting and kind of fresh for like someone who has mind control powers, not to use it for evil. I mean, sure, you got Charles Xavier and he can take over people's minds, and just for the mind control stuff specifically, it's not just like the minimizing deaths. That stance is more of just a straight up pacifist stance. Okay, there was Druig, there's Sprite. Kingo was actually one of my top favorites as well. Okay, this movie actually does do a good chunk right now that I think about it.
My friends from college are here.
You see, that's good. That's a good explanation.
Oh, Karan, he's worked with me for 50 years. I trust him completely. Actually, when we first met, he thought I was a vampire, and he tried to stake me through the heart.
I kind of hope he almost died each of those times, though, in order to keep up the they're not invulnerable consistency.
Look at this.
Whoa.
You know, seeing as we don't age.
You know what? I actually like that joke. I was really like, oh, it's a filter. It's whatever was in 2021. But for them to show that, they specifically use the age filter because that's. I actually kind of like that. But then this bit is why I really like Kingo and like his implementation for kind of the world building of the Eternals.
Talking about that is my great-great-grandfather. That is my great-grandfather. Grandfather, father, and me. I'm part of the greatest dynasty in the history of Bollywood. Pretty impressive, right?
You abandoned me in Macedonia.
Okay, I got sick of moving every 5 years. People freak out when they notice that you don't age.
This is why I like Sprays, because of this consistency. Because that entire scene was good, I might actually write in a few other scenes as well. We've got, it'll be out of order, but we've got the airplane scene. I'm just going to call it the Aztec scene, just because, I mean, the reason why I like that so much is because Druig carried it so far. Like the writing in that whole scene and the kind of existentialism with that level of immortality and what you know is so well done. And I forgot to mention this to Kingo. When Kingo talks about his, you know, I guess ancestry or dynasty of Bollywood, where he's like, what are you talking about? This is my great-great-grandfather, or my great-great-grandfather, great-grandfather, grandfather, father, and then me. Like, outside of like a small reference for what happens later in the movie, but that's the only thing that's actually referenced outside of this movie. Like, and outside of like the small little news article or the this or that, like the most explicitly tied connection to this movie is in Miss Marvel.
Don't tell me you have a massive crush on Kingo too.
My mom's just literally obsessed with him.
Mine's the same. She still has a huge crush on Kingo Sr.
Ew.
It's ironic if you know who Kingo is because it's the same guy. So the fact that like probably one of the most solid parts from this movie from memory is the most explicitly referenced later on, I'm fine with, even though the rest of this movie or like the implications don't really make much sense.
It's a beautiful creature. What? This? No, it's hideous. You've never had one try to bite your head off.
I think that's weird, or it's not necessarily weird, it's an interesting choice with the depiction of deviants is in the comics, they're more humanoid. It's like they can speak, they can look like people, but they have more of this shapeshifter quality to it where they can turn into monsters and stuff, but they're still relatively intelligent, like they can speak, they can look like a person and, you know, deceive and then turn into their monster self.
I'm Karun, Kingo's valet.
Oh, valet, like Alfred in Batman.
I think this is the first time that DC was referenced as a medium in this. I know it's referenced somewhere else after this movie.
Ajak's dead.
We lost her.
I don't know if that pie slit was needed or not. I will say yes. Okay, now seeing that the pan broke, there's like a small moment of levity to see the pie fall and be like, the pie fell up, and then just seeing him break the pan, which it also kind of shows like, yeah, he's the literal heavy hitter, but for him to also have this far more compassionate and kind of relatively caring side, like, you know, being a good cook or whatever. I actually like that dichotomy.
Speaking of Odin, Thor used to follow me around when he was a little kid. Now he's a famous Avenger and won't return my calls.
So now that Captain Rogers and Iron Man are both gone, who do you think is going to lead the Avengers?
I like how that's a question that's still very much up in the air, but that's not why I paused it. I paused it because I forbore. Oh, right, the Thor reference. I will get into that in a little bit. I think we're almost there.
I'm just going to get some air.
I know we're almost there to the thing. We're just going to do a very quick intermission, if you will. So, fun fact. So I actually did do a bathroom break, and then I tried to do a little bit more, and then I got interrupted, and then when I went to check to see if I was recording, it only recorded 9 seconds, so I didn't even get any of that. Sorry about the mic situation. It turns out those mics did not work, so you were just hearing me from the camera directly, so not only were they too short, they just weren't working. Let's get back into it.
And something unusual's happening to Earth.
It is a side effect of the emergence. It is time for you to learn the true purpose of your mission. You were sent to Earth to bring forth the Celestial Tiamat. Every billion years, new Celestials must be born. The planet Earth was chosen to host the Celestial Tiamat.
This aspect is actually directly pulled from a specific issue run, I think. So this part, I'm personally fine with. It is actually adapting part from the comics directly. So this part of the scene, perfectly fine.
Everyone on Earth will die.
The end of one life is the beginning of another. Our universe is a constant exchange of energy, an infinite cycle of creation and destruction. Without us, our universe will fall into darkness. All life will die.
Okay, so I will pause it here. For one, I'm going to actually add Tiamat to this part here. But I did pause it for not just so I can add that. But some people theorize that whenever or if ever Galactus gets established within the MCU, that similar to how Ego in the comics isn't a Celestial, but in the movies he is, they might do a similar thing with Galactus. Because I did watch this video how, because of this idea of that being like there's some kind of flow of energy or maintenance of energy or blah, 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 that Galactus, he's someone who devours planets, like eats planets and cosmic bodies and things like that. And that video kind of was saying he does this towards things that like are maybe dying out in energy, and then as a result, he kind of creates new energy out of that. It's just a random thing. It's just an observation nonetheless. Not necessarily related to this movie, but using the lore of this. And one thing they'll kind of establish here in a little bit, maybe they played it just now, I was too busy working on the board. Something they kind of do more in this is they kind of say, oh yeah, they helped create the universe, or they created galaxies and stars and this. To my knowledge, they don't do that in the comics. They're more so like experimenters. I'm not saying they haven't done stuff like that before. The fact that it seems like they're being held as mostly responsible for these things isn't necessarily comically accurate. Or, yeah. Yeah, if I'm wrong on that, feel free to correct me in the comments.
She has helped many Celestials to emerge over millions of years. So have you.
Earth was my first mission. I was home on Olympia.
There is no Olympia.
What? No way. Yeah, now we're getting into the juicy, critical stuff.
It is here that I built and programmed the Eternals.
I have to hold myself back. I have to hold myself back. I have to hold myself back.
Everything dies except us, because we were never alive.
I will say, for this robot spin, I mean, that line works. I mean, only in that sense. But it's a really interesting line. I have a relatively simple refutation for it.
They are stored here. I keep them in order to study the deviants. I created the deviants, Sersi, for the same purpose I created you, so intelligent life could grow. But there was a flaw in their design. They evolved, became predators themselves, and I lost control of them. I built and programmed you, Eternals, to be synthetic beings and incapable of evolution, to correct my mistake.
So that's an interesting take on it, but again, I'll refute that specific point later.
Do not fail me.
Okay, here we are. At 3 exclamation points on there because I have been so angry on this for the 2+ years this movie has been out. Because, as I mentioned, I did at least some research going into this movie. And let me explain to you how things go in the comics. And then explain why I was hyped. And then explain why I feel kind of betrayed, to be honest. And then why this is all kind of stupid. So, I've been holding off for this moment. In the comics, so I mentioned how the Celestials are kind of experimenters. They like to experiment with things, and a good chunk of stuff they like to experiment on, or at least a few of them, because a few of them kind of like specialized in specific things or interests, I think. In the comics, the Celestials came to Earth. They didn't send Eternals down to Earth. They came to Earth. And then they took a group of humans, like not all of them, but a few of them, and they divided them into 2 camps. Some of them they made into deviants, and then other ones they made into Eternals. So that's why I mentioned that in the comics, deviants aren't these, giant beasts and super dumb. They're more like intelligent monsters because they can maintain a human-looking form, but they can still shapeshift into some actual monster-looking entity. Which, I mean, just based on the surface, I'm fine with what they've done in Deviants in this movie, but with how everything kind of connects here, you'll see why I ultimately am not a fan. With the Eternals side, they basically just took a group of humans. I can't remember if it was just these 10. I'll get into that later, because I'm not going to spiel everything here. There will be a part of it reserved for the end, okay? So even if you think this is the main course here, there will be a part later on. With the Eternals, a group of humans were given powers and then were basically preserved at that age. That is why Sprite is still a kid and looks like a kid, because Sprite was a kid who was turned into an Eternal. So the Eternals were just humans given powers and given this. So when it comes to this, like, oh, we made you robots so you can't evolve or do this or do that, even if they were realistically human, they're preserved at that age, at this and that, regardless. Like, they can't age, they're basically the same, they live forever. So it's like, even if they were really organic, it doesn't matter. So there's that. And that's, I think, was how it originally was in that original Jack Kirby run establishing the characters. And I mention that again just because that wasn't a part of the original main Marvel canon. Now, when they were shipped over to the main canon, they added one small element to this mythos, or to this origin. So not only do you have Eternals and Deviants coming from the exact same origin point, that being the same experimentation. I don't remember what the original purposes were outside of just experimenting for experimentation's sake or just for fun. I think there was some reason for it, to which I can't remember. But when they did that, I don't know if they did it to somehow every human or just to a group of humans where they only did this one thing, where they added an extra gene into the human gene pool. And the idea was, we're going to give humans the ability to be like Eternals. So these people weren't going to be fully Eternals. This gene wasn't going to be activated for a long time. But this was the retconned origin, as in, when they shipped this over, they let this be the new origin of the mutant gene. So in Marvel Comics, the mutants are tied to the Eternals, because the origin of the Eternals is the exact same origin, or at least origin time and reason and originators being the Celestials, as the mutants. So knowing that, I was like, oh, Marvel now has access to the mutants because of the Fox buyout. They can use this movie to set up mutants. And they said, nah, they are robots from space, because that makes sense, and makes sense for why we're establishing these characters. Hear me out. It does not. It does not. You see, you made them robots. So now they did gender bend characters. I feel like I meant to mention that before, but I don't think I did for whatever reason. Maybe it was for one other aspect, which I'll get into it in a little bit. But they did gender bend a few characters that were originally male. But I think ultimately what they did, I think they ultimately have 5 guys and 5 women. So I kind of like that idea of a balance there, even if it, doesn't make a lot of sense for what the original idea was for why, who was what. Which Sprite, I mentioned how Sprite was supposed to be the origin of fairies and maybe elves and stuff like that. Sprite's the only one that gets a pass, because that doesn't change that at all. But like Makari and Ajak, those, like, I think it was just those 2 really, were the bigger deviators in that logic. Anyway, why the robots and the deviants make no sense? Well, the deviants point specifically I'll get into later. But with the Eternals, if they are robots, what is the practicality of having one look like a kid? Why would you have one that is deaf? Now, the deaf one is a thing original to this movie. That's not the case in the comics. And one thing I thought would be interesting that they could tackle, which they don't at all, is I thought it would be kind of perfect for a character who goes super fast and could cause sonic booms to not have hearing. I thought that'd be a fun parallel, or some fun thing to bring up. I don't think they do. But then it's like, why would you have a deaf Eternal? If these robots have gone through multiple things, they're just memory wiped. Could be a damaged one, similar to Thena, I guess, is why she has mad weary and all that. It's like, why would you have a kid? Why would you have a defective one with the deaf one? Thena, we'll just give her a pass, because maybe, with the robot's case, it's a glitch. So you have those, that's like, okay, doesn't make a full lot of sense there as far as the efficiency in design. But then you also have the fact that we have the scene. If they are robots, how and why, if they are robots? Like, it makes no sense to me. I mean, I don't want an answer for that part specifically, but just the fact, like, why are you making them do organic things if they are indeed not at all organic? Now, the food and stuff like that, we'll just give that a pass. Like, that specifically, this scene specifically, it makes no sense. It's like, it doesn't make narrative and in-universe sense with this logic. So, if I were to do a rewrite, it would be, get rid of this space robot stuff. And you can, and the rest of the movie honestly does not change. It really doesn't, if you get rid of that. Well, you can keep basically the exact same story and get rid of that. Now, granted, there's a little bit of existentialism that I think comes from them being robots, which you can't really get if you're, really organic. But still, and I think I saw somewhere that they may have done this on other planets. So that's a gray area that I'm not fully fluent on. But like, I think I heard that the Skrulls were originally the deviants of whatever race was on that planet, which explains the shape-shifting nature of them. I'm not fully sure how accurate that is. And supposedly, because of other eternal-like things, that is why the Kree, the blue guys, tried to do their own experimentation and ended up kind of creating the Inhumans because of them trying to create things like Eternals. I mean, the Skrulls thing, I'm perfectly fine with them just being an alien race that turns shapeshifting. I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm just mentioning the comic precedent. But like, and we don't talk about Inhumans, especially for like, I watched that show all the way through. I pained myself. But still, it's like, you get rid of so much potential. That makes no sense. Now, here's another thing. I explained how I felt betrayed because we could have used them to at least tease, even if they didn't confirm, they could have at least used it to tease the mutants. And they didn't do any of that. But this movie makes even less sense, like knowing what I've already talked about with how they were supposed to have inspired all these religions around the world. The fact that in Love and Thunder, they just confirm that every god from every religion, like pagan religion or pantheon exists, then what on earth is the role of the Eternals? Like Thor, like I mentioned how they bring up Thor. I feel like that's an exception because up to this point we just kind of saw the Asgardians as just aliens who were just kind of worshipped as gods by the Nordic people, by the Norse. And that's perfectly fine, like with this logic here. Love and Thunder kind of skews that a little bit, not making it invalid, but just kind of skews it a little bit. But the fact that the Eternals are supposed to, now in the comics, you can get away with it because people don't care as much about continuity in the comics as long as the story you're currently reading makes sense and is good. Because you can let things fly if there's little discrepancies or kind of flaws in the logic here and there because there's so much to juggle. But with the movies, when they've taken so much care to make everything make sense and to not have things contradict one another or things like that, you would have thought they would have thought things through. Like, we're going to establish these characters that Jack Kirby wanted to have inspire mythologies. Great. What other movie do we have coming up? Thor, Love and Thunder. What happens in there? There's going to be a city of the gods. Who on earth is there? Literally every single god. Even a random bowl of ramen. I'm pretty sure he's ramen. Something weird like that. I'll probably react to that movie. I don't think I've seen that movie a second time. If I end up doing a part 1, part 2, I'm going to cut it here. So yeah, I do have more to talk about. I just don't want to address it yet, especially for those of you that are watching this to watch the Eternals. It does touch back on all of this again, but there's even more I want to say, but I don't want it to kind of spoil something for later. So let's get back into the movie.